Here, hello students, our next chapter, that is systematics of living organism. Systematic of living organism. That is our second chapter. In previous chapter, we have seen that the living world. In that living world, the basic principles of life, then some taxonomic tools which helps to study the living organism. In this chapter, we are going about the systematics of living organism. Systematics of living organism. Now, on the earth or in our surrounding area, there is the great diversity of organisms. Means a lot of plants, animals, microorganisms, they are present in our surrounding environment. Okay. Then humans, they use such animals, plants, microorganisms, humans uses for their own benefits, while the human being are taking the benefit from animals and plants. Then there is the important thing, differentiate between that organism and identify that organism. That is very important points. Lot of animals, plants present, but there is important thing, that is a difference between the animals, difference between the plants, difference between the any microorganism, and their identity is very important. So there is the evolution of new branch in a biology. That branch is called the systematics or classification. Systematics, or we call the classification. Why the need of systematics, or why the need of classification? Why the need of classification? And why the human being going to classify this organism? Because we are taking benefit from the organisms. First thing, organisms, from the organisms we are taking benefit. First thing. Second, there are a lot of organisms present surrounding, so that organism should be identified, should organize them, and will study that organism for our purpose, so there is a branch that we call the classification or systematics. Now on this classification, there is from the ancient time the different philosophers, like Indian philosophers, then Greek philosophers, Roman philosophers, they studied on this classification of organisms and giving one of the way to study the plants, animals, and microorganisms. That we will study in this chapter. Simply to classify the organism, for that purpose we have to identify the characteristics, what are the characters present, where that organism is found, that all very well know. Then we can take benefit from such organisms. For getting the benefit from organisms, we need to classify them, and after that we are getting the benefit. Then in this chapter, the first point, that is the systematics or classification. First point, that is the systematics. And what is the meaning of systematic? First, systematics, first we will see definition first. It is a kind of what? It is a study of kind. It is a study of kind, and first thing, it is a study of kind. It is one of the type of study. What? Their diversity of organisms and diversity of organisms. What is the purpose to study the diversity of organisms? How can we study the diversity of organisms? By two ways. We can compare the organism, and also we can check the evolution of that organism. So we can first their comparative study, or we call it the comparative or comparison study of between the organisms, and second, evolutionary relationship between organisms. Evolutionary relationship of the organism, or evolutionary relationship between. This is the definition of systematics. This definition given by the G. Sampson scientist who first time proposed this such an important definition. G. Sampson in 1971. Now systematics definition, it is the study of kind, first thing. Second, in that study, diversity of organisms. Diversity means variety of animals and plants that can be studied. How comparing that organisms, comparison between two plants, comparison between two animals, first thing. Second, evolutionary relationship, from what that animals evolved, from which place that animals are evolved, from whom that animals are evolved or plants evolved, that can be studied, and that is given by the G. Sampson scientist in 1961. This is about the systematics. Remember the definition, study of kind and diversity of organisms and their comparative and evolutionary relationship, first thing. Now second definition, that we called taxonomy. That we called the taxonomy. Now in the first chapter we have seen the taxonomic tools. Now taxonomy means just the classification of living organism. We call it the classification of living organism. But this taxonomy, under the taxonomy there is a classification, no problem, but that classification by certain rules, by certain principles. So that is very important. Means while we are going to classify the plants or animals or microorganisms, that time there are certain rules are used, certain principles are used to classify them, and that branch is called the taxonomy. And how can we write the definition of this taxonomy? Taxonomy means what? Classification following certain rules or principles. This is the taxonomy. Then what is the meaning of that word? That word comes from the Greek letter. Here is taxis, means arrangement. Taxis means arrangement, and nomos means what? Nomos means law or rule. Nomos means laws or rules. This is the meaning of that word taxonomy. Then this taxonomy term was first time coined by the Swiss botanist that we called the A.P.D. Candolle scientist. This is the name of scientist who first time introduced the term. Which term? Taxonomy term. Which term introduced this scientist? Taxonomy term. Taxonomy term introduced. This is the taxonomy. So taxonomy means what? Classification of living organism following by certain rules and principles. Taxis means arrangement, nomos means laws or rules, we called them. And this term was first time introduced by this A.P.D. Candolle scientist, and this was one of the Swiss botanist. This is the second definition. First systematics, second taxonomy. Remember these terms. Now third one, classification. We know the classification. Classification is very important for the study of diversity. Without classification we cannot study the diversity of living organism. The classification of any material is very important for study purpose. We can study in detail when there is a classification. If there is no classification of any organisms, we can't study. So classification is important to the study. And what purpose of that classification? First we will see the definition of classification. Classification of plants, classification of animals, classification of microorganisms, that are the very important. Now definition of this classification is that it is the group of organism, it is the group of organisms, it is the group of organism, first thing, in a distinct categories, in distinct categories in accordance with a particular and established plan, this is the classification. Classification means what? Classification means making a group of organisms, first thing. In that group arranged in a distinct categories. There are 7 important categories. That categories I will tell you while we are studying in the taxonomy specific in our chapter. There is a next point, taxonomy. In that we will see the categories, 7 categories. In a distinct categories in accordance with particular, means there is a particularity for the classification. Why we classify, why there is a need of classify? So there is a particularity to classify that organism, and while we classify, we preparing or we are making the first plan to how that organisms classify. So there is a well established plan is very important to classify the organism. This is very simple a definition, that is the classification. Now classification, there are 3 types of classification basically. Classification, first one artificial, second one natural classification, and third one phylogenetic classification. These are 3 classification. First artificial classification, second natural, third phylogenetic classification. These are the different types of classification to classify the plants, to classify the animals. So what is the artificial classification? On what basis that classify the organisms? First thing, second natural, and third phylogenetic. Now first we will see the artificially classification. With the help of tree diagram we can also study this classification simply. First classification, under the heading of classification, first classification artificial. By comparatively we can study that classification, means comparatively artificial, natural, phylogenetic classification we can study with the help of comparison, artificial, natural and phylogenetic. First artificial classification means what? Now this is the classification which is based on our observation and non-evolutionary features, on the basis of observation and non-evolutionary features. Now this classification that is based on observation of plants, observation of animals, and then note down the characters of that animals, plants. That is a simply observation. Second point, it is based on non-evolutionary features, means those features they are not evolved in that plants or animals. That features like such as habitat of that organisms. If suppose there is a same habitat, we can make the same group of that organisms. If different habitat, we can make easily the other. Then habitat, color of organisms, different organisms having different colors, so we can classify them, and forms of that organisms. But this classification, it is a very irrespectively, means that can classify the proper organisms. So their relationship with organisms cannot indicate, proper relationship not indicated. So such a artificial classification is not suitable for classification of the living organism, and such artificial system was classified by the scientists, that was the Linnaeus. So here is the Linnaeus classification. Linnaeus scientists classify the organism by artificially way. So there is a Linnaeus system of classification, which is the one of the artificial classification. This is the first. Second, natural classification. The natural classification, know that natural classification means that is based on the objectively significant, means it is very explainable of the organism. So it is based on objective studies of that organisms, means we can explain about that living organism, how they grow, how they develop, their explanation in detail by the way of nature, through the nature, and it is very convenience. It is very convenience classification, means it can understand to everyone. So it is a very convenience classification. And their example is the Bentham and Hooker's system of classification. Bentham and Hooker's classification. This classification, Bentham and Hooker, they classified for the plant seed classification. Regarding to the plants, their seed classified with the help of this natural classification. And third one, that we call the phylogenetic classification. This classification is based on the common evolutionary descent. It is based on common evolutionary descent. Descent means origin. Descent means origin, that we call the descent. This classification was performed by again two scientists, that we call the Ingerl and Printel system classification. Printel system of classification. The name of scientist, Printless scientist. This is the three types of classification. Just remember 2 points. What is the meaning of artificial classification? On what basis that classify the organism? Second, natural classification is based on objectives of that organisms. Who coined this natural classification? Bentham, Hooker's. Phylogenetic classification, that was coined by the Engler and Prentless system of classification. This is about the classification. In classification content, there is two terms always used, taxa and categories. That terms we will see in the next point, that is the taxonomic categories and taxonomic hierarchy. Now next point, three domains of life. Three domains of life. This is about the classification and their types. The next also important point, that we call three domains of life. Life, already know that life having some characters, life having some features. So about life no problem, but we are studying about the next point, that is the three domains of life. Now the life on the earth that originated from water, okay, life that is originated from the water on the earth, that time that life is a very simple form, means on the earth there is a first time life produced or formed or originated on the earth. That life is a very simple form of life. Very simply, means there is only the protein molecules, water molecules, that molecules makes the life. Then constantly these simple lives undergoes the struggle for their establishment, constant struggle. While they are struggling, simple life form, Simple life forms struggle constantly, and there is giving rise to more and more perfect forms of life. Constant struggle that produces the perfect form of life. Perfect forms of life. Means in our earth there is a simple form of life. Life is very simple. That is origin of life on the earth, very simple form of life. But after that, that simple form of life struggle to environment constantly. After struggling, they moving towards making the perfection of life. So finally, struggle and progress, there is evolution of diverse life forms. After that, the simple life undergoes the diverse forms of life. But how? By struggling and by progressing, means that we generally call the evolution. Evolution of simple life converts into the diverse form of life, but in the way of struggling, in the way of progress, they makes the perfect life, and perfect life forms our nature. In the nature there is a diverse plants and animals, microorganisms are formed. So this can be the simple point for the origin of life on the earth. Simple, and they become a complex. Now our life become a complex, but the classification of living organism, that points we will learn. Now these three domains of life first time introduced by the scientist name is the Carl Wood. Carl Wood. This is the scientist who first time introduced the three domains of life. In which year? In 1990. In that year they introduced this or proposed these three domains of life, means life having the three domains. Now these domains are, here I will write here, three domains. Now first one, archaea, second one, bacteria, and third one, eukarya. These are three domains. Now domain means what? Domain is the larger unit of classification. What is the meaning of domain? Domain, it is the larger unit of classification. Larger unit of classification, that is called the domain. And these domains of our life, there is the domains, three domains of life, means these are the domains: archaea, bacteria, and eukarya, or we call the eukarya, eukarya or eukarya, eukarya. Now bacteria and archaea, they belongs to the prokaryotes organism. Prokaryotes. Bacteria and archaea. Bacteria and archaea means what? Archaea means that organisms lives in an extreme condition. In extreme condition means what? In a high temperature, in a high salt concentration, high pressure, high light intensity. That condition is called the extreme condition. Under such a condition the organisms lives, and that organisms classified in the domain that we called the archaea. And bacteria, there is a bacteria in our surrounding nature, in air, water, soil, all omnipresent. Omnipresent means bacteria found everywhere. Bacteria found everywhere. And number of bacteria means most of the bacteria, the larger bacteria found in the soil. Remember that one is the soil is the major source of bacteria. Also the air, water, in that there is a presence of bacteria, but compared to this water and soil, or compared to this water and air, the soil having the more bacteria. That is just point for you. Bacteria and archaea, they are prokaryotes. Prokaryotes means that organisms are unicellular organisms, first thing. Then eukarya means that belongs to the eukaryotes organism. Eukaryotes organisms are plants, animals, that is the eukaryotes organism. Now all three domains, archaea, bacteria, eukarya, that is depends, they have the unique ribosomal RNA. Now this depends on these three domains, depends on unique ribosomal RNA, unique ribosomal RNA. Now remember that unique ribosomal RNA, that is 60S rRNA. 60S rRNA. This is the unique ribosomal RNA. By using this unique ribosomal RNA, these three domains of life can be made by this Carl Lewis scientist. On the basis of this scientist uses the ribosomal RNA and classified the living organism into the three domains: archaea, bacteria and eukarya. Archaea, the bacteria having the extreme condition. Bacteria, they are found in our nature surroundingly. And eukarya, that is the plants and animals, they are the eukarya. This is the about the three domains of life. Now between these two there is a difference. There is also cell wall present in archaea and bacteria, that is also the cell wall present, but archaea having the different types of cell structure, cell wall structure, and bacteria having different types of cell wall structure. That is the difference. This is about three domains of life. Means three domains of life. Who proposed Carl Lewis first things. What is the three domains of life? Three domains of life means archaea, bacteria, eukarya. In that, on what basis that three domains of life remains? That is based on the ribosomal RNA, and that is particularly 60S RNA. Then what is the meaning of the archaea? Archaea means those bacteria survive in a very extreme condition, like high temperature, high salinity, high acidic condition, that is called the archaebacteria. And bacteria and archaebacteria, there is a different, both are prokaryotes but having a different in their cell wall. Cell wall structure of this archaea, that is a pseudopeptidoglycan, and cell wall composition of this bacteria, that is only the peptidoglycan. That is the difference between the archaea and bacteria. About the eukarya, eukarya consists of plants and animals, and some multicellular fungi. That is the eukarya. This is about the three domains of life. Now today here I am going to stop here. Okay, thank you.